got a couple former students here. Sometimes adjunct here at SUNY Brockport, and this is the E-Yah-Pah-Hah Quintet. So we specialize in playing classical music written by Native American composers. So what does that mean? Anybody here in band ever in your life? Band. Anyone ever in your life in orchestra? Chorus. So those three groups that you have been in school are all rooted in something we call Western art music, which specifically means art music from Western Europe. It's a very well-known genre for us who are in the Western world, but it is not the only music that's out there. Obviously there's pop music, there's folk music, but even those three types of music are part of Western music. So if you go around the world to different cultures, they all have different types of music that fulfill different functions, serve different purposes, things like that. So if you're thinking about Western art music is from Europe, how the heck did it get over here? The answer is Europeans coming to America, bringing music with them. But obviously there were people here before, Native Americans, who had their own musical systems, traditions, rituals associated with music. So this music that we're performing tonight is a synthesis of those two things. Native American composers who have taken their background, their history, their heritage, and put it through the lens of Western classical music. So it's really interesting, the combination of these two things. We have three pieces for you tonight. Two of them were written by living composers, one specifically written for this group that was just premiered for the first time last week. So that's exciting to see something for the second time ever in the history of the world. Little bit of background of the group. I'll let me tell us about that. Let me introduce everybody. So I'm Scott, as you've heard. I play Quintet. Over here we have Susan Walters on the flute, Derek Pulley on the oboe, Maggie Warren on the horn, and our founder, Kate Wilbert, on the bassoon. Kate was my band teacher way back in the day, reached out about starting a group. So Kate, if you would tell us a little bit about why you started this group.
Well, you kind of already covered it all. So, as a trained classical musician and a music teacher who is of Native descent, it felt like those two entities were way far apart. And it's something I struggled with for a long, long time. So when I met Dr. Lewis Ballard, one of the composers Scott will talk about in a few minutes, it was like, wow, there are classical music Native American composers. And one of the things that Dr. Ballard particularly wanted to do was to not take a tune that he knew from his Cherokee or his Quapaw background and then write a piece around that. Instead, he wrote music that was about his Native American experiences as growing up in that culture. But all the composers that we're working with, which makes it really interesting, use their own perspective of their own heritage in many different ways. Dawn Avery, who we're going to hear tonight, likes to bring in traditional Native instruments into the pieces. And so that makes it really fun too. It makes us have to stretch a little farther. The other thing Scott wanted me to mention is what we're wearing. These are called ribbon vests. I'm going to have Carl stand up next to me here. So it's really common in Indian country to have ribbon shirts. A shirt with lots of ribbons hanging off of them. And they're all really unique. You're not going to go to Target or wherever and buy a ribbon shirt. These are handmade by a seamstress, usually at the request of somebody who wants to wear it. And they very often two people will design it together. We don't have a E-Yah-Pah-Hah about when we show it to you. No, he doesn't. Okay. Sometimes men, it's not for you there. Okay. So if you're not a seamstress, this is the yoke in the back. Okay. So the Hiawatha belt, which is 4 squares with a white pine tree in the middle, would very often be across the back in ribbon. Very often white ribbon on a shirt. It's very common here in the Haudenosaunee country. So our friend Rosalie Jones, who's a choreographer who is Cree, and she was born on the Blackfoot Reservation, Montana. She is a choreographer of contemporary dance, and she actually taught for a couple of years here in the dance department in a residency. She designed the ribbon shirts for us, and we just made it. Okay, is that everything?
So our first piece tonight, it's a 3-movement work called Ritmo Indio. The subtitle is Study in Indian American Rhythm. It's written by Dr. Lewis Ballard. Lewis Ballard is Quapaw and Cherokee. He was a pianist. When he grew up, after studying music for a long time, he became one of the directors of the Institute of American Indian Arts, where he had a vocal group called the E-Yah-Pah-Hah Singers, which is the source of our name. E-Yah-Pah-Hah means town crier. So we are the town criers bringing Native American classical music written by Native American composers So this work, it's in 3 movements. The first one is called the source. The source of what? Maybe the source of life. It starts with these bubbling rhythms. The second movement, the soul, features a Native American flute. And the last movement is called the dance. We'll have a brief pause in between each movement. If you just hold your applause until the end. Just together. This is remote E-Yah-Pah by Elizabeth House. dance the first two and said, okay, which one's the name of the third? The first was the source, we just played the soul. The last one is called the dance. Montgomery University? Montgomery College, which is in Maryland. So she's a cellist, a composer, and an ethnomusicologist. If you've never heard that word, that is a person who studies how music functions in a culture. We have one in the back of the room, Dr. Natalie Saracen, our resident ethnomusicologist. Oh, just a weird little connection here, because I think this is interesting. So, Dr. Avery got her PhD from University of Maryland, College Park, which is also where Dr. Saracen got hers. And her graduate assistant at the time, Victor Vicente, was in classes with Dawn, and they both taught at the same university. So there's this weird connection, not to speak of our own connection. Kay's been in touch with Dr. Avery as we worked on this piece, and on another piece by her called An Hour of Ghost Dancers. Oh, and Carl over there is going to speak before our last piece. He is also a Mohawk turtle fan. So there's lots of interesting connections here. Just a point about that, when I was talking about the whole art music thing before, usually when we think of classical music, we think of like Mozart, Beethoven, dead guys. Like what's the relationship, what's the connection to what we're doing now? And it's kind of hard to say there is one. So what's been really interesting in learning about this particular project is we're working with people that are alive, and we're not just told like, you're supposed to like this person's music because that's what we're supposed to do. So that's been very interesting. So, medicine shield, what does that mean? Medicine can mean a lot of things to many people. It can mean a healthy diet, it can mean exercise, it can mean emotional health, psychological health. It can mean spending time with people that you care about. It can mean pursuing your hobbies. What is a shield? It's something that offers protection. So, medicine shields, so you can see that this piece, we're not exactly sure what her intention behind the title is, but based on what I said, you can kind of put together your own idea. This is very different than Ritmo Indio. Ritmo Indio is very dissonant, very clashing. This is a lot more melodic. So while Ritmo is about rhythm, this is more about melody. You're going to see some more native instruments. 3 of us are playing ocarinas. It's like a flute-like instrument in Central and South America. There's also this horn pedal. And towards the end of the piece, you're going to hear us all in unison clicking our keys. We're not exactly sure what Dr. Avery's intention was at this point, but we think it's supposed to imitate a powwow drum, which is this big circular drum, sits on the ground, 6 to 8 men sitting around it, beating it with mallets. Sometimes they'll hit the rim of the drum. I think it's supposed to imitate that sound. That's good. Right. So without further ado, this is Medicine Shields by Dr. Dawn. Yeah, great. And you got to year 3. That's a pretty good deal. Our final piece this evening is called Postcards from Native America. Obviously, I have to tell you a lot about it, but I'll save some of that because we have a guest speaker who will talk a little bit about it in a moment. It's written by Dr. Charles Shadle. He is a music instructor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. This piece was written specifically for us, for this group, and we played it for the very first time ever on October 27th at Canadian State Historic Site out past Victor. So this is, I mentioned this before, this is like the second time in the history of the world that this is being performed. So, so Dr. Shadle, he is an enrolled Choctaw, Oklahoma Choctaw, raised in Colorado. This particular, I'm trying not to give too much away because I have to let Carl say some stuff. So we met Dr. Shadle in 2022, I believe. A number of us are in the Eastman Community Music School Music Educators Web Ensemble. Say that 5 times fast. And Dr. Shadle was in the area and he had written a piece for that group called Granaries. We were talking about starting this group, so we got the group started. We met Dr. Shadle, who worked with us on a different piece of his that we had arranged for this group, and that led to they asking him to commissioning him for this specific work. It's in 5 movements. It's called Postcards from Native America. Before I say too much about it, I'd like to introduce Ash Fair. He is the Vice President of Friends of Ganondigan. He'll tell you a little bit about what Ganondigan is, talk a little bit more about the commissioning of this work, and then before each of the 5 movements, he'll give us a little bit of information about what that movement is supposed to represent. So, without further ado.
So, about Ganondigan. Ganondigan is a state historic site. It's located just west of Victor, New York. And the reason it's a state historic site is it was the site of the largest Seneca town back in the 1600s. There were about 2,000 people who were living there. And that irked the French. And so they decided it had to go. Part of a whole history of people trying to make indigenous folks disappear. And so they sent an anvil down, who landed at Runaway Bay, marched south to the Victor area, to Ganondigan, where they destroyed the village. They burned all of the stores that were harvested and put up for the winter, and basically scattered the people who were living there to other Seneca villages. So the Ganondigan Historic Site is about recognizing that we weren't discovered. We were here, and people need to know that. And it's important because it was a survey done about 10 years ago where they surveyed high school graduates, and the majority of them thought we were extinct. That indigenous people had been wiped out. We're not. We're pretty resilient. We're still here. So this historic site honors the history and displays the artifacts and has actually an authentic longhouse on the property. But it also is committed to speaking to the existence of the culture today, which is why pieces like this, which are contemporary indigenous artworks, are so important. So Ganondigan does a number of programs, and we won't get into all of that. If you're curious about it, I encourage you to go to the website where you'll get a lot more information about all of that. But it does the job of talking about our history, talking about our culture in the past, but reminding people that we are still very much alive in a culture that's growing and evolving and producing unique works like this one.
Oh, Kate would like to mention it. The past 2 years we've been fortunate enough to play at Ganondigan. It's the last Sunday, as I mentioned, and last October for Indigenous Peoples Day. So this is hopefully a continuing activity that we get to do each year, commissioning new works and performing them, premiering them at Ganondigan. Without further ado.
So, in terms of this particular piece, Postcards from Native America, 5 Tribal Capitals, by Charles Shadle, was composed during the spring of 2024. and was commissioned by Kay Hoover, Cherokee, for this wind quintet. Kay requested that Charles write a piece reflective of her Cherokee heritage and his Choctaw heritage, and the connection they both feel to Oklahoma. Postcards from Native America is to celebrate 5 of the tribes who call Oklahoma home, as well as evoking some of the character and history of the places that are historic centers of their tribal governments. First movement, Tishomingo. All right, I don't speak Cherokee or Chickasaw, but I got it right. Tishomingo is the capital city of the Chickasaw Nation prelude. Some of my earliest memories center on the eccentric granite Capitol building set in serene and park-like setting. Wewoka is the capital city of the Seminole Nation. Wewoka experienced a frenetic oil boom in the early 20th century. The middle section of this energetic dance is intended to reflect the rough mechanism of the oil. Creek Nation. Charles shares that he finds the proportions of the Creek Capitol building particularly satisfying, with its vernacular Greek revival massing particularly attractive. It seemed right to evoke it through a particularly rigorous formal structure. Tuscaloosa is the capital city of the Choctaw Nation. The Choctaw Capitol building, unlike the others, sits by itself in rural isolation. This movement began as a short solo piece for Native American flute that was later transferred to the medium of wind quintet. The form is particularly simple, like the verse and chorus structure of a popular tune. Tahlequah is the capital city of the Cherokee Nation. This word, featuring several contrasting musical ideas, reflects the complicated history of the Cherokee capital. Charles imagines that the accompanying rhythm that begins the movement suggests the sound of turtle shell rattles, and much of this piece has a dance-like character. You hear this opening rhythm in the bassoon and clarinet. To be a turtle shell shaker, to be a turtle shell shaker is a respected and earned position by a Cherokee woman. Cherokee woman's regalia is a full skirt going nearly to the ground. When a woman is a turtle shell shaker, she will wear a shorter skirt, nearly up to the knee. The turtle shell rattles worn around the calf are meant to keep rhythm and interject powerful symbology and spiritual energy into the dance.
Thank you.